Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a massive, often totally invisible drain on corporate resources. And much more importantly, we're going to talk about how to actually fix it. We are looking at the ultimate goal here, maximizing your corporate training return on investment. So how do we do that? Well, by putting an end to those generic, one-off courses that don't really move the needle and replacing them with a highly targeted, performance-based learning and development strategy. If you want your L&D function to be a real strategic powerhouse instead of just a reactive order taker, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. If you pulled up a list of the last 20 training modules your organization developed, how many of them were actively solving your company's most critical problems? Be honest. The reality is, L&D budgets are far too often wasted on low-stakes distractions. We build courses just because someone asked for them, or because it seemed like a fun idea at the time, rather than because the business fundamentally needed them to survive or thrive. Okay, let's dive into this a bit deeper. The traditional mindset often goes after what we call the low-hanging fruit. You know the type, generic topics with mass appeal. Sure, it gets a lot of butts and seeds, but the actual return on investment, it's incredibly low. Contrast that with the performance-based approach, which targets high-stakes areas. This means focusing on authentic tasks where there are high risks or high rewards for the business. This is where a change in performance actually has a measurable impact on the bottom line. And frankly, that is where we need to live. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the L&D alignment problem. Second, establishing formal governance. Third, architecting instructional content. And finally, fourth, the development framework. All right, let's jump right into part one, the L&D alignment problem. So the core issue we face is squandering shareholder equity on whoever happens to be the loudest political voice in the company, instead of focusing on what operations actually needs. To fix this alignment problem, we need a shared vocabulary. Specifically, we need to talk about critical business issues, or CBIs. These are current problems, opportunities, or future strategic challenges that carry genuinely high stakes. Crucially, these are the only things that warrant the significant investment of formal learning and development. If a training request comes across your desk and it's not tied to a CBI, honestly, it should probably be left to informal or social learning. Which brings us to our second stop, establishing formal governance. So how do we actually guarantee we're only working on those critical business issues? We formally align L&D with enterprise leadership using a concept called command, control, and empowerment. At the very top of this hierarchy, you have the board of governors. These are the executives making the ultimate business and funding decisions. Right below them are the advisory councils, and they represent specific functional needs, like sales or engineering. And finally, you have the project steering teams, who are on the ground steering the actual approved initiatives. It's a two-way street. Requests for L&D support flow up through the councils, and finalized business decisions and resources flow down from the governors. This structure literally stops those rogue one-off requests in their tracks. I absolutely love this quote from our source material by Guy W. Wallace because it is just pure corporate real talk. He says, just because an instructional systems designer can uncover a valid need for instruction does not in and of itself warrant meeting that need. You might find a knowledge gap, sure, but does closing that gap actually offer a significant return on investment? If it doesn't, you don't build the training, period. And we've got to take that ROI incredibly seriously. When a project steering team holds a gate review meeting to check on a project's progress, notice that option 1 on the table is kill the effort. It is intentionally presented first. Why? Because if, at literally any point, the project stops making solid business sense, we should stop spending money on it immediately. Having that as option 1 keeps everyone entirely focused on actual business outcomes, not just creating training for the sake of checking a box. Moving right along to section 3, architecting instructional content. Now, what's really interesting here is how we solve the massive problem of gaps, overlaps, and bloated training inventories. We have got to stop treating every corporate problem like a nail that requires a generic training course hammer. You know the ones where we all just mindlessly click next over and over until we can guess the answers on the final quiz. Instead, we need to divide our approach. Performance support is for a reference performance response. Think job aids, checklists, standard operating procedures. The learner doesn't need to memorize the information, they just need to be able to follow it. Learning experiences, on the other hand, are for a memorized performance response. That's the stuff requiring authentic practice and feedback. So, your absolute golden rule of thumb is this. Default to standalone performance support first. Do not build a full-blown learning experience unless the job actually demands that the employee has the response memorized in their head. I'm telling you, this simple shift completely stops the incredibly costly assumption that a training course fixes everything. It saves time, it saves a ton of money, and it gets employees back to actual work so much faster. Okay, but what about when we do need to build? Well, we don't just start writing content. We architect it from the top down. Here are the 4 phases of instructional architecture. First, project planning and kickoff to clearly set the scope. Second, rigorous analysis to define the exact tasks and enablers. Third, design, where we create a structure that's actually robust against future changes. And fourth, implementation planning, where we prioritize what gap content actually needs to be developed or acquired. This systematic approach basically eliminates redundancies before a single module is even built. And by going through those architecture phases, you generate these very specific blueprints. You don't just get a messy pile of content. You get performance competence development paths that show the big picture. You get individual planning guides to personalize the journey for a specific learner based on what they already know. And you get detailed module inventories and specifications. This means you know exactly what you have, exactly what you're building, and how it all fits together like a giant puzzle. Finally, let's wrap things up with Section 4, the development framework. Let's move to and see how this all builds. Now that the architecture is mapped out strategically, we actually execute the build through a highly systematic 6-phase instructional development process. We go through detailed planning, deep dive analysis of the specific content, specific design of the materials, the actual development or acquisition, a rigorous pilot test to make absolutely sure it works in the real world, and finally revision and release. Because we architected everything first, these development phases are fast, they are targeted, and they are completely modular. And here is a whole reason we do this, the undeniable return on investment. Look at how specific enterprise costs drop when you reuse modular, architected content. Development costs decrease because you're sharing modules across different roles. Inventory costs drop because you eliminate all those redundancies. Administration is totally streamlined. Deployment is way faster. And crucially, evaluation and maintenance are simplified. Think about it. If a policy changes, you update one module centrally, and it instantly updates across every single learning path that uses it. It's a real game changer. So, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative question. Look at your current processes right now. Are you architecting high-impact L&D for those critical business issues? Or are you just squandering shareholder equity on generic one-off courses? It's time to make the transition. Stop being an order taker and become a strategic, performance-driven business partner. Restructure your approach, align with enterprise leadership, and start architecting for maximum impact. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.